All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. As regular listeners to the show know, the obvious focus of this podcast is on Manitoba artists, Winnipeg and beyond, obviously. But I also like to talk to what I call Manitoba adjacent artists. So that usually gives me an opportunity to interview people who are from here and maybe they moved away, or they have some connection to Winnipeg and to Manitoba and art here at the moment. So the guest on the show, I think, falls into the Manitoba adjacent category. And I think the best way to kick this off is if you want to just introduce yourself and maybe give a bit of background about, first of all, what you do musically, and then what your connection is to the city and the province.
Sure. Well, my name's John Testar. I'm originally from Winnipeg. And I'm basically, at present, I guess I would loosely define what I'm doing as kind of being like an improviser and a composer.
Okay.
I had many years of a background as a classical musician, as a classical guitar player. And I had actually started my lessons living in Winnipeg, and I lived there until I was 23 years old. So I spent a good lot of time there.
Yeah, for
sure. So basically, there was an inception period, I guess, when I was 18. I started taking it a lot more seriously, like playing classical guitar, and I was really into it and had great local teachers. And beyond that, I guess the reason for leaving was just to expand my horizons in studying that and just,
okay.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, from what I've heard of your stuff, I know you have a lot of kind of videos that you post on social media of you performing, and there's some stuff on Soundcloud and everything. I mean, the improvised nature of it seems like a pretty significant part of what you do. And so, I mean, there are a lot of people who do music that's improvised, but the fact that you're a solo musician and it's just you and a guitar, maybe this is too big of a question to start off with, but how does one approach improvising when it's just you and you don't have anyone to play off? You're just sitting there with the one instrument and you're trying to make it, and successfully, I think, sound like an actual piece of music rather than just someone noodling, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Which is always the struggle.
Sure.
But I think it just comes from having done classical musician for such a long time, and you're often playing in a social or a solo context.
Sure.
So I was already comfortable doing that. So, I mean, it's probably my greatest strength at time is being able to do that. I mean, I certainly can play with other people too.
Yeah.
But I find, I feel comfortable with that role. And I find like a lot of the times with jazz musicians, it's often the opposite. Like, they don't like that a lot of the times. I mean, there's some who revel in that, but
of course, yeah.
So I'm just kind of playing to my strengths, I guess. Yeah. And
so maybe this is getting a bit too, obviously not technical, but specific. But I mean, when you're sitting there and you're going to be playing, whether it's for an audience, whether it's for yourself, what is the process of creating a piece? I mean, I'm sure there's obviously more to it than just sitting there and just messing around and seeing what sounds good, because you have all this training and all this background and the musical theory and everything behind it. How do you put something together like that?
Oh man. Well, sometimes I don't even know, which is one of the best parts of it. Is that, I mean, I think like just to give you a little backstory, I mean,
Sure.
When I lived in Winnipeg, I mean, I was basically like a skater guy, and it was all about, being risky, and there was a spontaneity to it. And all of my friends who did it were also very much like that. And they also happened to be artistic types, and it's just the personality, I think.
Totally.
And it translates in that way too. And it's not just because I want to gamble and risk, although I think that's part of it. There's an adrenaline thing, especially when performing, I guess, but it's more about just kind of getting deep into yourself and saying, okay, like, even though your brain is screaming, I don't know anything. I've got nothing. It's a really terrifying proposition.
Yeah.
At times, but it's really nice when you can just finally kind of dive off that diving board and say, okay, like, I'm vulnerable and here we go, and that's often when it happens, when you get past that point.
Well, maybe a better way to ask the question then is how do you know when you've hit on something good? Like, what is it that works for you as a creative person? Like, when you're sitting there playing, what determines this particular sound, this particular series of notes, of chords? How do you know it works? Like, how do you know this is something that you want to share? Potentially, I don't know if you want to replicate it, but do something in that vein again, right?
Well, I mean, certainly, I mean, one thing that always happens, I always get like a really dumb smile on my face when I'm just doing it. And it's just like, okay, like, so there's something happening in here, and I can just either choose to stay with it or go with it. And I know I'm kind of happening with it. And I can also feel it from the audience too. There's a synergy that just locks in, and you know that you're in there.
You're connecting on some level with,
for sure. And it's like a reciprocal thing, and you can choose to expand on it or whatever, you know. So I mean, it's a very malleable thing. And then the best is when you can actually remember something, and then you've got a seed for something later. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't, though. You know, sometimes it just goes away forever, and you're like, wow, I have to let that go. Like, it's not going to happen again. But that's part of it too.
Well, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the risk-taking element of it. Does it help that there is no, that the listener doesn't know what to expect from you? Like, I mean, it's not like you're performing a song where they've heard it on the radio 1,000 times and they know every chord change and every you know, verse and chorus. Like, they know what to expect, right? I mean, you're doing something where the expectation isn't really there. It's just kind of, what's he going to come up with next, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the one thing I think I went pretty full throttle with it at one point, in the sense that I was just like, you know, I love this improvisation, and it was almost like a rebellion too against the classical stuff, because I did find it somewhat stultifying. Like it stopped me in a certain way. But yeah, I don't know. But I realized I went maybe a bit too far, and it's not, you know, it's a very common thing. I mean, you want to achieve some balance between some recognizable stuff, but you know, I mean, you know, for example, I did an arrangement of a Caribou tune that I just posted a while ago.
Right, so and he commented on it, right?
Yeah, it was.
That's super cool. Yeah.
That was pretty neat. That made my day for sure. But it's just stuff like that. It's nice just to fall back on things, because that's the thing. Like, you know, I found myself going, good Lord, like, this is so much pressure, you know, to do that all the time. So, you know, I'm still in the process of achieving a balance with that, for sure. And it's hard to do, because the creative whim can go anywhere, you know, so.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that the having the kind of formal background and then doing the improvisational thing, because I find that a lot of people are either one or the other. Like, I know people who are just incredibly well trained musically, and they can play anything you put in front of them, and they can play it by ear, but then you get them to improvise and it's not there, because they are it's so drilled into their head, like, that they have to do it the way it is, everything perfect how it's written. And it's a totally different, like, do you feel it's a different side of your brain just trying to like play something?
I think so. Yeah. Absolutely, for sure. And like on that note, for example, you know, people I studied with, they would always claim like, you know, I can't improvise, I can't do this. But meanwhile, like, you know, they used to jam on like Zeppelin tunes and do their own thing. I'm like, well, there you go. I mean, that's
you're doing it.
Yeah. I mean, you know what to do, but it's just that when you're in that horse blinder context, I mean, there's virtually no opening for that. Yeah, you know, so you have to make it yourself, and you know, so yeah.
Do you think it affects people's ability? Like, do you think it just naturally kind of impedes your ability to be, I don't want to say original, but I guess original, if you've gone through so much of that, where the rigid kind of training where you're everything is sort of dictated to you?
Well, like I guess like some musicians come to mind. Like, I'm thinking of, you know, like a jazz pianist like Oscar Peterson or Keith Jarrett or someone. And, you know, Keith Jarrett's certainly like a really big inspiration for me. But those are people who really struck a nice balance between being able to, I mean, they clearly have that training in their finger. I mean, that discipline is there, but because of the discipline and all their other kind of latent abilities with improvisation, it's just a lovely marriage. But often the time, I mean, you know, it's very rare. I totally agree with you that, you know, you don't see that every day, but I think it's something to shoot for. You know, because even historically, I mean, all those great composers that we often think about, they were improvisers. I mean, you know, it was just, and why did they do it? Because that's where the heart in music is. You know, it's in the moment. I mean, it's fun.
Yeah.
You know, so,
well, it's supposed to be anyway, right?
Yeah. Like, you know, so I mean, that's why I think they did it. It's just because they feel it, and it's spontaneous. Yeah.
So where do you sort of feel like you fit in genre wise then? Because, you know, people think improvisation, they immediately think jazz. Yeah. And obviously there's some of those elements in there, but I don't know if I would say that you're just specifically a jazz guitarist, because there's a lot more going on there. And then again, with improvisation, people will go all the way over to like the harsh noise kind of side of things, and then you know, and that's not what you're doing either. So how do you just describe it? Like, do you have sort of a Cole's Notes version of saying what it is that you do?
I guess, I mean, like, I guess almost like a tongue-in-cheek thing would be, it's like progressive guitar. Like
Yeah,
that's as good as I have right now. I know it's very incredibly lame, but um, yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, like up until very recently, like it was kind of like almost like an existential crisis. Like, like where do I fit in? Like, where's my clan or my
yeah,
tribe
yeah,
type of thing? And but I'm beginning to understand that it's okay not to, and I don't mean that in a cheesy way or anything. It's okay not to fit in or anything, but it actually is okay because
yeah,
you can draw strength from that, and I find that I do in that process. Just like, oh, this is okay. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it doesn't have to belong to anything necessarily, but it certainly borrows from those things. I mean, I constantly listen to those musicians, like such as jazz musicians, all
Sure,
the time.
sure.
But I don't feel comfortable again, like submitting to like one form and being like, this is my life. I just can't do it.
Well, that
It's
maybe leads to an offshoot of that question. Is people, especially now, the way people consume music and everything, everyone wants to put a label on everything. Everyone wants
yeah.
to have a subgenre of a subgenre of a subgenre, and
Yeah.
really put everything in a little pocket somewhere so they can file it away in their head. How does this affect you as far as playing live? Like you have
Hmm.
this sort of nebulous identity as a musician, right? And like,
Yeah.
do you? Who are you playing shows with? Like, what kind of audiences are you performing for and stuff? I mean, I know now we're in the midst of a pandemic, so
Yes, for
shows have
sure.
probably been few and far between. But just in general,
Well, like just the fact that there has been all this time to kind of reconsider, and inevitably you think more about what you're doing to a
yeah,
certain degree. You have more space for that. And I kind of just realized that, I mean, a lot of my favorite musicians were the type who could play anywhere. So, but particularly, I mean, even talking with my sister, she even just dropped an idea being that you can play, like, what about folk festivals, because
yeah,
it's just an open thing. And I remember even going to the Winnipeg folk festival, and you just happen upon some artists that you have no idea where they come from, what they do, but they didn't necessarily belong to anything, but it was like, this is fantastic. I mean,
yeah.
that's all that matters. And and you're grooving to it all day. And I thought, this is really great. And it was just open, and maybe, and I'm thinking, certainly the potential is in festival kind of atmospheres like that. I think that would make sense.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, there might not be an answer either, other than that either, right? I mean, it's just kind of because it's hard to define. How does it work then, as far as recording goes? I mean,
Hmm.
if you're doing 90% of or most of what you're doing completely on the spot, improvised, how do you know what to record? Do you record everything and then sort of select the best pieces from that, or what's the strategy there?
Well, like for example, I like in actually about 3 months now, I'm going to be recording an album, like a full length solo
Cool.
guitar album in Toronto, with one who's a very good friend, and his father, who's like he's a retired senior CBC kind
Oh,
of
cool.
music producer, so he knows his microphones, and
That's convenient
just
to have.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very convenient, and they're wonderful people, and so it makes it a lot better. Um, okay, repeat the question. I lost my train of
The question
thought.
was, when you're recording, how do you decide what's going to end up on? Like, for example, with this album
Oh,
you're working on,
yeah.
is it all just kind of do you just do it all on the spot and record that, or do you have sort of predetermined ideas or seeds of ideas to start from?
It's kind of like a balance between both. Like so the idea is that, like, I'm going to have these things, but for now they're going to be called interludes. So it's going to
Okay.
start with something in a kind of a free improvisatory fashion, and it will come in, and then it'll fade and recede, and then there'll be a composition which will have improvisation, and then
Right.
that will go away, and then there'll be another free improvisation. So it's kind of layered, and almost like kind of like a DJ Shadow album or
Okay.
something.
Yeah,
Like
I can see
it's
that. Yeah.
very
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very from his album Introducing, for
Introducing. Yeah.
example, like he calls them transmissions,
Yeah.
but it adds like a lot of atmosphere. And so, but then there'd be like these beautiful, we'll call them compositions, that he put forth, and it's like, wow, this is just solid, like
Yeah.
in that sense. So it's kind of boring from that theme, I think. But certainly there's some predetermined compositional aspects to it, like firm structured
Yeah.
compositions. So it's kind of a marriage between those two.
Well,
Yeah.
this is maybe a similar situation, not quite the same, but one of the things I like a lot about listening to free jazz, especially like people who are really good at it, is that it will be chaos for a long time, and then suddenly everything just for like a minute gets sucked back into some kind of order, and
Yeah.
so you know that everyone that there's structure here, even though it's so loose and so chaotic that
Yeah.
suddenly like you've been listening to 10 minutes of noise, and then for 2 minutes they're all playing the same thing, and just that moment of like sort of clarity that this is something that actually has a focus and a flow to it and everything, and just back to nuttiness.
Yeah.
I'm not saying yours is the same at the same level of crazy, because it's just a guitar, but
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like it's a similar kind of theme where you're going from just improvisation to something that has a that people can follow, and then back into the more imaginative, I guess, parts.
Exactly. Yeah. Because like I think we've all seen shows where it's exactly that. It's almost like an anarchistic, like it's
Yeah.
free for all and it's noise. And like I saw a show with a gentleman who went up there, and it was like probably the loudest show I've ever heard. And he actually took nails to his pickups, and it was
Oh, wow.
it was unbelievably loud, but still very much admiring it, because I know what it takes to get up there and do that, at least to get up and perform in general. But I do find I feel concussed after those moments, and it's just like, so my thing, I mean, it usually has to have some sort of melody or progression based aspect to it. But there's room for everything, but definitely like tying in something to hold on to. I think that's important for me, Yeah.
As a guitarist, I mean, as the guitar being your only instrument that you're sort of conveying everything you're conveying, what is the most important aspect of it? Like, is the tone as important as what you're actually physically playing on the guitar? Just because you have this one instrument to make this sound, and you're obviously, I get the feeling that you there's a lot more thought into it than just, like we said, you're not just noodling, you're conveying emotion, you're conveying themes, and putting feeling into it. Like, what sort of elements of the physical guitar are important to do that? I mean, how much of it is playing and how much of it is manipulating sort of the sound of the instrument just from the get-go?
Yeah, like, well, it's kind of weird actually, because like, I mean, in terms of the electric playing, like I've been very much influenced from jazz guitar. I mean, like, I tend to use the neck pickup a lot, and I roll the tone off a little bit. So I'm definitely cheating or borrowing from that type of aesthetic.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is a big consideration, but I am playing solid body, kind of typical American guitars, you know what I mean? And that's it. I mean, I don't play the hollow body guitars or anything. And so, yeah, like I mean, it is a consideration, but it's actually quite simple. It's like, just give me a Fender amp and one of these, that's all I need, like it's very, like whenever, friends go, hey man, I got this, pedal for the tone, I got the compressor. I'm like, no. This is just, it's too much. It's already it's just too much. I like it really simple, because, to me, for me, that's where the life is again. It's just like in the simplicity of the setup, and then you don't have to worry about it as much, I should say. But and but certainly on the nylon string, whenever I'm playing that, I mean, I'm certainly like the tone aspects are, I derive that from the classical days, and that's a big deal. I mean, you spend years and years trying to get that to an even keel, right? So that's been pounded into me. So yeah, it's not going anywhere either. So
when you're choosing to go between the classical guitar or the electric guitar, what is the choice based on? I mean, is it just sort of a feeling, today I'm going to be playing this one, or do you have sort of I want to play something with this kind of feel to it, or I have this emotion and I want to get it out? How do you select the instrument?
I think it just has to do with things like, sometimes I'll use like alternate tunings on the guitar. It's a very common thing to do. But I mean, there's a certain sparkle and shimmer that you can't get on the electric guitar versus the acoustic.
Right.
So there are certain things that require a certain depth or atmosphere and a shimmer, because I like to have long pauses and like, just to really draw things out. And you can certainly do that with the electric, but it's just a different sound. So, but it's also like what you were saying, like sometimes it's just a feeling. It's just like I'll wake up and go, God, I hate acoustic instruments. I just hate them right now. I just want to go full on electric.
Yeah.
So, I think that there's some whim aspect to it, absolutely. So
I guess just to offshoot of what you just said, how important is silence in what you do? I mean, having those periods where you stop playing, because that's as much a part of the song as the actual notes you're playing, especially as a solo artist, right?
Yeah. I think it's, well, as an example, I mean, my master class in silence was going to a Keith Jarrett concert,
Okay.
actually. Like,
Okay.
and it was in Toronto. It was a birthday present. I was just overjoyed, and there he was, type of thing. And he walks out with a big Bossendorfer classical piano, you know what I mean? And he just sat down. But when the spotlights dimmed, he sat there for over 2 minutes. And as a performer and as an audience, that's a long time.
It's a little awkward. Yeah. Yeah.
But you hear some murmurs and coughs and stuff, and as soon as and you could see him not knowing where to put his hands, and because he does free improvisatory concerts, so he would just lay the hand down. It was go perfect. It's just perfect, So it's incredibly important, I think, and knowing that you can do that, and it's not. I mean, it can be awkward for others, but you can't make it awkward for yourself, because what you're trying to do is. What you're trying to do is just get into that thing that is always there, I think, so it's just a matter of just, allowing yourself to essentially ground yourself into it, which is, can be a battle sometimes. Right. So
sure. I believe it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How can people hear your stuff? I mean, I know you said you're working on an album, which will be a few months away here, but as far as just checking you out online and keeping up with what you're up to, what's the best way to find you?
For right now, it's Instagram and SoundCloud. For now, it's just like I'm actually in this kind of inception period as to figuring out how to actually put myself out there. Like I'll admit it, I'm that guy. But luckily, I'm definitely learning, and so the next step is to get a YouTube channel and website and all that kind of stuff. So the ball is rolling, but
cool.
Certainly Instagram and SoundCloud would be the first thing for now. But
well, that's an interesting problem I think a lot of people have, where they can handle the creative side of things no problem because they've been doing that their whole lives, but then it's like, oh, I have to market myself and sell myself, and it's a weird sort of I mean, even for me doing this podcast, trying to get people to listen, it feels weird, right? So, I mean, you kind of like, I'm forcing myself into your space, making you demanding your time, right? So I get that for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm certainly one of those people, but I happen to have a friend who's actually from Winnipeg, who's a visual artist. Okay. And she offered to be my manager. She told me she's very displeased with my marketing skills. So I think I have good people in my camp, who aren't afraid to be critical, which is great, so good. Like bring it on type of thing.
So what are the addresses for the Instagram and the SoundCloud? I'll link to them in the show notes, but just so people listening, if they hear it and they happen to be at a phone or something and want to look you up, what's the best way to find you there?
Well, the easiest way is just through the Instagram. It's just at John Testar. And then the SoundCloud link is actually found within the Instagram. It's just at the top type of thing. So yeah. Perfect.
And then the good thing about this being a podcast is someone could be listening, the week it comes out, or they could be listening a year from now. You think Instagram by then will probably still be the best place to go? Or are you hoping, as you said, to expand your empire of social media?
Yeah, definitely hoping for expansion by that time, for sure.
Cool. Yeah. And then the record, when it comes out, I mean, I know you're months away here at this point, and no one knows what's going to be happening with the pandemic. I mean, hopefully things improve, but
yeah,
we've been saying that for 2 years.
Yes.
What is sort of your immediate plans once you have the record out, assuming you can play shows and assuming that things are more open?
It's exactly that. It's just really just getting gigs, just playing out. And luckily, in a city like Toronto, I mean, it really is amazing by contrast, at least when I was younger in Winnipeg. I mean, I know it's changed since then, but there's people performing every day here. Like it's just, and there's so many places to play. So that's the first thing. And then shopping it out to festivals, really just trying to get on a roster there would be cool. Would be the next step, and just as long as the stage is there. So
right on.